Have you ever thought you'd heard the most tragic love stories in history? Forget Romeo and Juliet. Because this story will send literal chills down your spine. No one dared to stop him from sleeping beside a decomposing corpse for 7 whole years. And every courtier was forced to kiss her hand to show their loyalty. This was a king so powerful. A rotting body, seated on a throne, dressed in silk gowns, crowned with a royal diadem. You're about to enter one of the darkest, most haunting, and bizarre chapters in the history of European monarchies. No, this isn't a ghost story. This is historical fact. Why did an entire kingdom stay silent? Was it love? Was it fear? Or had they gone mad alongside their king? Brace yourself. And trust me, you'll never look at a romantic love story the same way again. It all began like a romantic tale, at least by medieval royal standards. Prince Pedro of Portugal, not yet king at the time, fell madly in love with a lady-in-waiting named Inés de Castro. He feared her family, a noble Galician house, would manipulate the throne. She wasn't a princess. She had no noble lineage. Just a beautiful, gentle woman. And completely rejected by the royal family. Inés was executed in a quiet garden while Pedro was away. Their love was forbidden from the start. Pedro's father, King Afonso IV, saw Inés as a political threat. And so, as with countless classic tales of power and control, no trial, no sentence. Just a few swords and a heart pierced through. Pedro returned and discovered the woman he loved had been murdered. But instead of weeping like a conventional tragic hero, he slipped into a terrifying calm. Then he swore, "I will make them see she was the true queen, whether alive or dead." He personally ripped out the hearts of 2 of them, one from the chest, one from the back, to see which heart was more treacherous. The entire court was forced to line up and kiss the corpse's hand to show loyalty to the true queen. Years later, after his father's death and Pedro's ascension to the throne, he began his plan for revenge and for canonizing a corpse. First, he hunted down and tortured Inés's murderers to death. But the strangest part was yet to come. Pedro ordered Inés's body exhumed nearly 3 years after burial. The corpse was no longer a woman. Not by magic, but by obsession, by love, and by grief turned to madness. It was decayed flesh, hair falling in patches, skin pale and ashen, eyes hollow and lifeless. He dressed the rotting body in royal gowns, crowned her, and placed her on the throne. Some vomited on the spot, others fainted, but no one dared refuse, because everyone knew to defy Pedro meant death. And from that day on, a corpse began to live again in the royal palace. How could a man live for years beside a corpse? The answer lies not only in love, but in the collapse of the mind, when grief and power collide. Pedro was not merely a hopeless romantic. He was a king with absolute power over life and death, unchecked by any council, bound by no limits. And most importantly, no one dared to say no to him. After Inés's death, Pedro wasn't just grieving. He was obsessed. He began to believe he was living in a world where everyone had betrayed him. Except Inés, it became a monument to loyalty, to idealized love, and to the eternal power Pedro refused to let go of. From that point on, her corpse became more than a body. And then that obsession spread across the kingdom. Courtiers, clergy, nobles, all were forced to play roles in a collective tragedy where everyone pretended the rotting corpse was still the true queen. Anyone who didn't comply was exiled, or worse, disappeared. Pedro once declared, "Only the dead cannot betray me." It sounded like sorrow. But in the hands of a king, it became state policy. He created an extensive network of spies to monitor his entire court. Hunting down anyone who dared whisper about Inés, people began to whisper that Pedro was no longer a man, but a crowned ghost living among the dead. He almost never remarried, had no official heirs, no princes or princesses dared speak up, because in his heart, the throne had room for only one body. Modern historians suggest Pedro may have suffered from post-traumatic psychosis or PTSD-induced schizophrenia, compounded by unchecked power. Over time, he crafted his own reality, one in which Inés was still alive, still loving him, and still the rightful queen. But if this were only a private tragedy, perhaps history would have forgotten it. What makes this tale so haunting is that an entire nation had to live inside the delusion of one man. The royal palace became a bizarre theater, where everyone played supporting roles in a drama whose leading lady was a silent corpse. Power, when left unchecked, can nourish anything, justice, or nightmare. With Pedro, pain became a tool to manipulate memory, to stretch a dead romance into a political reality no one dared to challenge. And for many years, the people of Portugal lived under the reign of a man who ruled by day and whispered by night to the corpse of his lost love. Perhaps the most terrifying thing wasn't the corpse itself, but the silence, absolute, unanimous, of an entire kingdom, before a king who had forgotten the line between the living and the dead. You might be wondering, why didn't anyone stop him, a man living with a corpse for years, turning it into a queen, ruling like a ghost? Surely someone must have spoken out. A royal advisor, a priest, a citizen, someone, but no. The entire kingdom stayed silent. And the reason is terrifying, because they could not, or dared not, distinguish right from wrong anymore. Remember, this was the 14th century. In that time, the king was not just the head of state. He was the one chosen by God, with absolute power, above the law, above theology. She was queen. If the king said a corpse was queen, then, if he declared kissing the corpse's hand an act of loyalty, the court had to obey. Refuse? That was treason. And the penalty was death. Worse still, Pedro didn't need a clear reason to punish anyone. He once executed a nobleman simply for grimacing near the queen. A servant vanished after accidentally dropping a hairpin from Inz's corpse. No one knew where he was taken. No one asked. They just avoided the king's gaze from that moment on. And so fear became the language of politics. The court turned into a silent stage where everyone wrote their own roles: the loyal minister, the humble servant, the bishop bowing to a corpse. No one wanted to be the side character who dies early in this royal tragedy. On top of that, the church remained silent. Why? Because Pedro was the first to declare that Inz had been legally married to him before her death. If the church objected, they would have had to admit the corpse being venerated was the product of sin. But that would mean they had failed in safeguarding royal morality, so they pretended to. They held a funeral, a coronation, chanted prayers for a decaying body, and just like that, the entire system, political, religious, cultural, nodded in agreement with madness, not because they believed Pedro was right, and the complicit silence of everyone around him, but because they feared facing the truth that he was wrong. For years, the Kingdom of Portugal was not ruled by reason, but by the personal obsession of one man. We often think cruelty comes from swords and bloodshed, but sometimes it comes when everyone chooses to say nothing at all. After everything, people believed that when Pedro died, it would all finally end. That the obsession would be buried with him, but no. Death cannot end what long ago escaped the bounds of reason. It only began a new chapter, one of curses, phantoms, and a kingdom that would never truly sleep again. Pedro was laid to rest in the Alcobaça monastery, where he had once built 2 tombs facing each other, one for himself, one for Inz, so that if they could not be together in life, they would gaze upon each other for eternity in death. But legend says even the earth didn't want to hold them. Years later, a tombkeeper claimed that on nights with a full moon, sobbing could be heard from the 2 white stone sarcophagi. Pilgrims visiting the monastery reported seeing blood seeping from the cracks of the tombs, though no one was ever injured. And during requiem masses, a strange sweet scent would fill the air, half rose petals, half decayed flesh, drifting through the chapel. The people of Coimbra, where Inz had been executed, began calling her a noiva morta, the dead bride. Children spoke of seeing a woman in a white bridal gown standing at the palace windows, gazing toward the cemetery. One newlywed couple was forced to leave the castle after hearing someone knock on their bedroom door every night, whispering in a woman's voice, "I was never allowed to be wed like you." Some historians argue all of this is folklore, the natural romanticizing of a tragic love story. But others believe Pedro's grief left a mark on every stone, every corridor of the royal palace, a historical wound that never truly healed. And the tombs, they're still there today, exquisitely carved, regal, eternally facing one another. Upon each tomb lies the sculpted figure of Pedro and Inz, arms outstretched, as if they are about to touch, but never quite reaching. And people say that if you visit the monastery on a truly quiet night and stand between those two tombs, you will feel something, not fear, but a sadness so deep. You'll find yourself asking, is this eternal love or a curse that never ended? So what exactly is this? A timeless love story? A tragic play about loss? Or a chilling testament to how absolute power can distort both love and reality? Pedro did not just love a dead woman. He turned an entire kingdom into a massive funeral stage where no one was allowed to speak the truth. And for many years, people bowed before a corpse, not out of reverence but out of absolute fear. This story reminds us that not all strange things in history are allegories or legends. Some really happened. And they deserve to be retold, not for sensationalism but as a warning. Because when love is combined with absolute power, it ceases to be love. It becomes possession. Darkness dressed as romance. If this story sends chills down your spine, confuses you, and makes you wonder why it's not in textbooks, you are not alone. And believe me, history holds many stranger and more horrifying truths. Hit follow, because what you know is just the surface. The truth is often buried deeper, sometimes as deep as a corpse on a throne.